I'm going to go over these, but the first two speakers just gave me a lot of, there's so much complexity with the pension systems. I kept thinking, well, California is similar in that way, different in that way. So just really quickly, we do have an OPEB liability that is very large, definitely for the state that has very rich retiree health benefit, but also for many of the local governments as well. We just recently, the CalPERS and CalSTRS recently lowered their investment return assumptions from 7 3/4 to 7.5. Very hard decision. We mulled it over for about a year. Hard to get it done. It really increases the liabilities, but I think it's the right thing to do going forward. Investment markets don't look like they have in the past. A couple other things. The governor does have a pension plan. It would be a hybrid with a higher retirement age. Right now, he's given that over to a joint conference committee. Who knows what will come out of that, but people are hopeful, and the governor is really hopeful because he's got some revenue raisers, some tax initiatives that are going to the voters, and the idea is if he gets pension reform done, there might be a little more political will to pass those. And one other issue on the issue of impairment of contract here in California. The Constitution and about 50, 60 years of court cases would make it very difficult to change benefits going forward for employees. But the courts have ruled that in some cases you can, if it serves a public good, you can change benefits. The catch is that whatever you take away, there has to be something of equal value given back. It's not really clear what that means. It's never really been decided in the courts. So really quickly, CalPERS and CalSTRS, the two boards that the treasurer serves on. CalPERS, about $232 billion in assets as of this Monday, 1.6 million members. Now that's state employees, that's school members who are not certified teachers, so janitors, special education, all the rest. Public agencies, cities, special districts, utility districts that don't have their own system. There are about 20 of the largest counties in California have their own. Some of the larger cities have their own systems. We also have a health benefits program that is, I guess, second to the federal government in terms of the number of members and the size of its annual spend. And CalSTRS has about $154 billion in assets. It includes all of the teachers. So we, like Rhode Island, has one plan for all of the teachers. CalPERS, about half of the members are in Social Security, half aren't. In CalSTRS, all of the members are not in Social Security. And both of them, the funded status of CalPERS, that's old data as of the last valuation, as of June 30th. It's actually improved, June 30th, 2011. It's improved, and aggregate state public agencies and schools, it's about 74% funded. We've had a couple of good years of returns. CalSTRS does not have, CalSTRS is unique. They don't have the ability to set contribution rates. It's set in statute, hasn't been changed, hasn't kept up with the annual required contribution. So despite a couple of good years of investment returns, they've actually dropped about 2 percentage points in the last year. So I was asked to speak today primarily about some of the pension problems with transparency and accountability that the pension systems have had. Let's see, which button makes it go forward? Top one? Okay. So I should start off by saying that Treasurer Lockyer has kind of a twofold interest in issues around pension system transparency and accountability. He started his career in the legislature, in the Assembly, in 1973, which was just before the passage of California's kind of sweeping political reform act, which covers everything from campaign contributions to lobbyist and conflict of interest and ethics rules for public decision makers. And so in his career with the legislature, which ended in 1998 when he was leader of the Senate, and through his terms, 2 terms as Attorney General, and now he's on his second term as Treasurer, he's always been very interested in ensuring transparent, open, good government. But the other thing right now is his interest in protecting defined benefit pensions for public employees, and also seeing what programs we can do, what we can leverage from things we've learned from the public sector and benefits side to try and bring about more retirement security for private sector workers. But at the same time that he wants those goals, preserve public employee benefits and try and work for retirement security for private sector, he's very much aware that we need to get in sort of fighting trim. We need to make sure that our house is in order in terms of public employee benefits, make sure that the benefits are adequate but not extravagant, make sure that the systems are run well and beyond question. And in terms of sentiment toward public employee pensions in the last decade, California is no different than anywhere else. We've experienced a lot of the same problems. During the boom times at the turn of the century, we had benefit enhancement that was for not only state employees but local too. So the benefits really increased. And then the following decade, we've seen a couple of unprecedented market downturns which have made it much more difficult to pay for those enhanced benefits. And then we've also had decline of private sector pensions and individual losses in 401k plans, which have led to really a perfect storm for creating what we often refer to as pension envy. And on top of all of that, there have been a number of scandals relating not just to California systems, but California's had its share of very high-profile ones, but pension system transparency and accountability problems. Today I'm going to focus mainly on these placement agent or pay-to-play scandals, mostly on the investment side of the pension house. But there's also been a lot of issues around just very high salaries. Pensions, of course, are driven by salaries. So when somebody retires with, well, in California, we've had cases of $500,000. That makes the news. And then we've also had egregious cases of what I would call pension spiking. There's two cities in Los Angeles County, the cities of Bell and the city of Vernon, which kind of small, very chummy city governments, and there were salaries set outside of the regular pay scales. There were people not supposed to be classified as public safety workers who were. There was types of compensation that should not have been reported as pensionable that were. And so these kind of blew up. They were CalPERS contracting agencies, and now the treasurer has, over the last couple of years, really tried to step up CalPERS' review of public agencies to make sure that these cases don't happen. Also to highlight, we now have online reporting of pretty much every city, county, and state employee. If you look them up online, you can go to the state controller's website and you see not only their salary, but their total compensation for probably the last couple of years. Pension accounting and actuarial reporting. There's been a couple of cases, New Jersey and San Diego, where they actually ended up settling with the SEC for misleading investors about the fact that they were adequately funding their pensions when they weren't. But I'm going to mainly focus on these pay-to-play scandals. A couple of years ago, I had never heard of a placement agent. I suppose now the scandals have been out there. It's not just California, it's New York. I believe Kentucky's been hit, Georgia, other states. But basically, a placement agent is a third party who's paid by a money manager to raise capital from institutional investors like pension systems. And you usually see this in the real estate or private equity sort of money managers. And they do have a legitimate function. They can serve a marketing function. They can really help money managers who are emerging, who are smaller, who don't have a foot in the door yet. But they've also given rise to a number of pay-to-play scandals. What we found at CalPERS is after some of these issues blew up and we started to take a closer look at the use of placement agents by CalPERS money managers, there's really kind of two types of placement agent firms. One is local, either in the state or close by, has strong ties to one or two pension systems, and mainly works to get capital committed from just those one or two systems. And then there's national firms hired because they have a broad relationship with institutional investors. And what we found, and the real problem is with the kind of local ones. If you think about it, these placement agents, because they're paid on a contingency fee basis, so a percentage of the capital that gets committed, if you're talking $100 or $300 million deals, that 1 or 2% can be a huge amount of money. And they don't have the diversity that these more national firms do, so they can't go shop around. So they have a high incentive to exert as much influence as they can to get that deal done. And in the case of CalPERS, as I'll explain later, what we ended up with is a former board member acting as one of the most prolific placement agents. So the problems with the placement agents, just because it's alliterative, fitness and fees, they both start with an F. I don't know if fitness fits the best, but basically it's the idea of if a money manager uses a placement agent, it raises this question of whether the fitness of the decision-making process or the decision makers. Did the use of a placement agent somehow lead to imprudent investments? And then the other issue is fees. So the pension system doesn't actually pay a placement agent. The money manager does. But given that the money manager pays this third party to market their fund to an investment system, you have to wonder if the fees that a pension system or other investor are paying somehow reflect that additional dollars paid to placement agents. So those are the two that CalPERS was most worried about. But I think the use of placement agents should also, it raises questions about you have to wonder what their value is to the money managers that use them. So they get these extremely high fees, which you could argue are maybe out of whack with the actual amount of effort that placement agents put into getting that capital committed to an investment fund. One guide that I saw for venture capital funds considering using placement agents, it had as a best practice to include in the contract the requirement that a placement agent, in order to get paid, has to have at least 2 face-to-face contacts with the investor. And so if you think somebody's getting, for one deal where, say, $100 million or $200 million of capital is getting invested, they're getting a couple $1 million, are they getting that for just 2 face-to-face contacts? And add to that, what we found at CalPERS is some of the private equity money managers hired placement agents, even though we already had a relationship with them, we already had investment in another fund of theirs. And so you really have to question kind of, what is that value that they're getting out of it?
Are you moving on from placement agents?
I'm moving on to what happened with placement agents at CalPERS, but you're welcome to.
Well, I was going to say, you mentioned Kentucky, and we did some comprehensive legislation on governance for the retirement systems, and that was one of the key pieces of it. And quite frankly, it's a kind of a minor issue in the big picture, but it's an important issue, and the media made a big
Right.
issue out of it in Kentucky. And of course, there was some shenanigans going on with these placement laws, not just making a couple of $1 million. I don't know whether it's worth it or not, but,
Right.
But there was some shenanigans going on. We passed legislation, and they now have to register as executive branch lobbyists.
That's the same. I'll get into that in later slides, but we had.
And we also said that we couldn't do business with them unless they were federally registered.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, but that's good because I know much more about what's going on in California in terms of reforms than elsewhere. So what happened in California? I just did a look this past week at articles because I realized I had never heard the term placement agent before 2009. And apparently the press hadn't either. So I just did a search of the 11, what I considered the major newspapers in California. 0 mentions of placement agent in 2008. 2009, there were 67. So the start of it really was an investment by then Attorney General in New York, Cuomo, and the SEC looking into a deal with a Southern California firm working with a placement agent firm in New York, kickback scandal, and the investigation grew, and then it ended up finding out that that same relationship between the manager in Southern California and the kind of connected firm in New York had also had dealings with LA's police and fire pension, CalPERS, and so the SEC started looking. Immediately after that news came out, the treasurer urged CalPERS to start their own disclosure policy. So anytime they were doing investments with money managers, money managers had to, well, they had to go back in time, but then also going forward, they had to disclose if they were using placement agents, even if those placement agents were employees of their own shop. So they had to reveal marketer, whoever was paid to market their fund and what those payment arrangements were. So CalPERS did enough of its own looking around from requiring this placement agent disclosure that it finally ended up saying, there's enough here, we need to hire an outside investigator. So they hired a Washington, D.C. firm, Steptoe & Johnson, to do their own independent investigation. Just unfettered look at documents. It was really kind of a way to stave off SEC coming in and doing their own thing. And the investigation actually worked very closely with SEC, the U.S. Department of Justice, California Attorney General's Office. If you want, I'm not going to go into all the salacious details of the report, but if you just type in CalPERS special review or placement agent review, you can see the whole report online. But I'll highlight some of the major findings. So what it found was that going back as far as CalPERS was involved in private equity and real estate space, about $180 million had been paid to placement agents in connection with CalPERS investments, and about 120 of that, 120 million, was to those kind of smaller local, really mainly to two firms that had very close connections, one being a former CalPERS board member. One thing that's kind of encouraging, the investigation found that fewer than 10% of the proposals made by private equity firms who used a placement agent were actually accepted by CalPERS. I'm not sure how that compares to the universe of private equity deals that are pitched to CalPERS where there is no placement agent, so I can't say if that's higher or lower. And then since 2006, the investigation found CalPERS invested more than $1.4 billion and actually committed $3.3 billion in assets with private equity firms that hired a single former CalPERS board member to represent them. Yes?
What was the guy's name?
It was Alfred Villalobos. So it's all in the report. It's very public. Yeah.
Question on that? So since 2006, 1.4 billion was invested where there was a former board member involved.
Yep.
What percentage of your overall investments was that?
Well, I could give you, what percentage of the assets that was by looking
Yeah. What percentage
of the private equity investment.
of all of the investments made through private equity firms with these placement agents, what percentage of those were made by agents who were former board members of CalPERS?
There were some of the biggest ones were, I don't have that percentage, but even though some of the biggest ones we're told by the investment staff and by looking back, the vast majority were done without the use of placement agent. So
I just want to get to, of those that were placement agents, how many were outside agents that had no relationship to CalPERS, and how many were former board members?
Oh, well, I think there was only one former board member, and I'd have to go back, but he probably did, a handful of deals, but some for very large sums. Okay. Getting on to more of the findings. So the special review found that there were gifts, there were trips. These weren't just coffees or lunches. There were, and it's all in the report that's online, private plane, private jet trips. When there was a pending deal between CalPERS and Apollo, a private equity manager, the placement agent working for them, flew one of the investment staff to New York for a party at the MoMA. There's a lot in the report to make you cringe. The other thing that they found that we've fixed with a lot of our governance issues was there was a lot of pressure placed on the investment staff. The former CEO at the time worked closely with Villalobos, the former board member, to try and get his friends, clients, CalPERS investments. We also found that the placement agent's activity extended to CalPERS, and again, this was this one former board member, but he was hired. So CalPERS runs a big health program. We have on the self-funded health program, we hire a pharmacy benefit manager, one of the big companies, to handle our pharmacy benefits. Well, the manager we had been using already hired the former board member, and on the day that the board finally decided through the competitive process to go with that vendor, a $4 million, the last installment of a $4 million placement agent fee was paid to Villalobos. And this one actually, it involved sitting board members at the time. The one, I guess one bright spot of the investigation is that there was no evidence in terms of the investigation that wrong decisions were made, that investments were made that should not have been made, that didn't pass either our policies or our due diligence process.
Outside of the gifts and trips and meals, was there ever an exchange of cash?
As far as the investigation turned up, no, but there was an offer of a job to the former CEO, and then the offer was accepted to a condo. So no cash, but gifts, and some of the gifts were big. A condo, paid for a wedding. So.
What about the political donations?
What about the what?
Political donations.
I don't know if the political donations to sitting board members who.
Either the sitting board members or the individuals at level of that.
The report, I would have to go back and look, but I don't think the report really highlights that was a large problem, although I know that it has been in places.
Try to rank it through the presentation, and then we'll open the floor to questions.
Okay. Okay, so as a result of the special investigation, the special investigation has been working closely with the SEC, Department of Justice, and the California Attorney General's Office. Much of the evidence and information that those agencies have is directly a result of the investigation. And just last month, the former CEO, Fred Buenrostro, and the former board member, Villalobos, were both the SEC brought suit against both of them. And since a principal allegation is that Buenrostro falsified documents that the money manager required, hey, if we're going to pay you placement agent fee, we have to know that the CalPERS is on board with knows you're working for us. And the CEO was not authorized to sign those documents. He did. So that's kind of one of the hinges of that case. Okay, so the reforms, just going to touch on these quickly, or the federal rules. The SEC now does, as of June 2010, requires that money managers who hire placement agents to solicit business from government entities, they require that those placement agents have to be registered as broker-dealers or investment advisors. In California, immediately after the placement agent scandal broke, so the treasurer asked CalPERS to have this disclosure policy for CalPERS itself, and there was quickly legislation passed that required the same disclosure for all other pension systems in the state. So if they're doing business with a money manager, part of that process before they make that commitment is then it needs to be disclosed whether placement agent was used on the deal. The next year in 2010, legislation pushed by the state controller, John Chung, required the elected members of the CalSTRS and CalPERS boards to essentially comply with all the campaign rules of any other elected official in the state. That legislation also included a 2-year cooling off period for board members, board designees, and higher level executives with the pension systems where before they go work for somebody else who has business before the board of the pension system, they have to wait 2 years. And then finally, in 2010, AB 1743 was sponsored and really thought of by Treasurer Lockyer. From the beginning, he had seen placement agents as lobbyists. They are third parties who are paid based on their ability to influence the outcomes of public decisions. And so by making them subject to our Political Reform Act, which governs lobbyists, that also took away the possibility of a contingency fee. And that was really it was kind of hard-fought legislation. The industry came out and said, emerging managers are not going to be able to find business with the pension funds. They need placement agents. And others said, you know, you're going to lose a lot of deals. People aren't going to want to play with California if they're saying we can't pay placement agents the way that we have. We haven't found that to be the case yet, and we've done a lot, especially CalPERS, to reach out to emerging managers with an online portal and with annual seminars to show how to do business with CalPERS. Okay, but some of the, I think, most sweeping changes that CalPERS made were not so much the state laws that CalPERS supported, but the internal practices and policies kind of fall into three buckets. One is what we required of the money managers with whom we do business. So we had the disclosure right off the bat, but then we also extended our disclosure policy to non-investment procurement contracts. So it would cover health or IT contracts. They would have to also disclose if a third party was used to gain our business. And then as a result of the special review findings, we went back to several money managers and renegotiated the fees and ended up saving about $215 million. Then a lot of what we did was internal governance reforms. The investment decisions, it was made clear that the investment decisions were delegated only to the chief investment officer and his or her staff. The investment staff are awarded, they're very much incentivized to make decisions that are in the best interest of the fund that lead to high returns because they have a bonus that's based on that. When the CEO puts pressure on the investment staff, as had happened under the old regime, well, they aren't incented the same way, and so we decided we're going to make a clear separation between the CEO and the CIO. New rules were adopted for communication between board and staff. If staff have a board member approach them about a specific investment, they need to contact the chief executive officer and the board president. Much more restrictive gift policy for staff and for the board. Last year, the treasurer urged, and we had a big study by a governance consultant, and the findings that came out of that in terms of board governance is we're going to now have an annual assessment of board performance. We've redefined what the roles of the board and staff are to really make it clear to everybody and try and align the interests properly and make it so that board members can't have undue influence over the day-to-day investment operations. And then a lot of what we've done is just to strive for more transparency. So we had the special review in 2009 is when it started. The findings came out about a year ago. And then enhanced reporting. Everybody in California who is at a certain level of influencing decisions has to file statement of economic interest forms, tells their income, all sources of gifts. Well, now CalPERS puts that online. They have a review process to make sure people are reporting correctly. We have public reporting of our quarterly, and it's online, of our placement agent. Whatever we get back on those placement agent disclosure forms, we report that quarterly. We have an ethics hotline so people can report cases of not only fraud but pension spiking. And we now have an online portal so people who want to do business with CalPERS, we've tried to make it as open and easy as possible. So investment ideas can be submitted online, and we have webinars and seminars to talk to emerging managers about how to do business with CalPERS. All of the travel expenses for board and staff members are posted online. Public record requests, we've streamlined that process, made it very easy to do online. We have live webcasting of the board's meetings, and all of the actuarial reports for all the public agencies are also online. So yes, some of the questions indicated that, how big is this problem? I've been told just by looking at what the report has found, it's a small, private equity, real estate are not huge. They're very significant parts of our portfolio, but even within those spaces, only a small amount of investments are placement agents, and not all of those involve anything untoward. But I think the bigger issue is that this is just one more of those issues that goes to the credibility of pension systems at a time when reform is such a big issue. So it's very important, I think, for CalPERS to have addressed these issues in an important way. It's one of the biggest black eyes probably that CalPERS suffered, in addition to just having the investment losses that everyone else did.